Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now, it is time to rest. As always, I will tell you a kind legend that once took place in our beloved Middle-earth. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. The moonlight lay like silver upon the white stones of Minas Ithil, the tower of the moon. Its tall spires gleamed beside the dark shoulders of the Duath, the mountains of shadow, and its banners, white with the crescent moon of Isildur, stirred in the cold night wind. To those who looked upon it from far across the land of Ithilien, it seemed a beacon of purity, standing guard against the dark lands beyond. Yet even beneath its beauty, unease had begun to stir. Strange fires were seen at night on the black ridges to the east. Smoke rose from hidden forges in the valley of Udun. The rangers who patrolled the mountain passes whispered of drums beating beneath the earth, and of shadows that moved where no torch burned. Captain Arthelion, commander of the Outer Watch, rode the battlements one quiet evening as the first stars came out. His mail shirt was dimly silver in the moonlight, and his eyes, grey as the sea, searched the horizon. He had fought in the eastern marches for many years, and though his heart was steadfast, that night he felt a weight he could not name. Beside him walked his young squire, Callan Mer, still new to the duties of war. The lad's gaze followed Arthalion's to the east. "Captain," he said softly, "the mountain peaks seem red tonight." Arthalion nodded. "Aye, there are forges burning in Gorgoroth again. The dark land is waking." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind sigh through the tower's white arches. Then a horn sounded faintly from the southern wall, a signal of return. Riders from the patrol were approaching. Arthalion turned and descended the stair. At the gate, the riders entered wearily, their horses sweating and eyes wide. The leader, a ranger named Dirhel, dismounted and saluted. "We have seen torches beyond the Morgul Pass," he said, "and more than torches, black banners, and shapes that do not move like men. The dead marshes are stirring." The guards nearby crossed themselves in dread. Arthalion frowned. "You are certain?" "As certain as one may be in that accursed land." We dared not ride closer. Arthalion dismissed the men to rest, and went at once to the tower hall, where the warden of the stone, Master Curuan, awaited him. The hall was high and domed, its walls white as pearl. At its center stood a pedestal of black marble, veined with silver. Upon it rested the Palantír of Ithil, the seeing stone wrought in the elder days, brought by Isildur himself from Númenor. The stone shone faintly, as though it held moonlight within. Curuan was an old man, tall and thin, his hair white as frost, his eyes dark and deep. He turned as Arthalion entered. "You bring grim tidings, Captain," he said. "The enemy stirs beyond the mountains. We must send word to Osgiliath. The king must know that Mordor is not empty." Curuan's gaze drifted to the Palantír. "I have seen hints of movement in the east," he murmured. "But the stone is restless. It clouds when I gaze upon it, as if another eye looked back." Arthalion frowned. "Can the stones deceive?" "They do not lie," Curuan said slowly, "but they show what another wills to reveal. I fear that someone, seeks us through it. A presence vast and cold, like the void between stars." "Then cover it," said Arthalion sharply. "We dare not draw that gaze." Curuan gave a faint smile. "The Palantíri were made to be used, Captain. To shut them away is to blind ourselves. But perhaps you are right. I will guard it closely." That night, a chill wind swept down from the east, and the moonlight over Minas Ithil seemed pale and distant. In the dark hours before dawn, Arthelion dreamed of a vast eye, wreathed in flame, gazing through endless darkness. He awoke with sweat on his brow and the echo of a distant voice whispering words he could not understand. The next morning, riders departed westward with Arthelion's message to Osgiliath. But even before they vanished into the woods of Ithilien, smoke was already rising anew from the mountains. Days passed. Patrols failed to return. The sky took on a strange hue, neither day nor night, and a low thunder rolled across the land, though no storm came. In the tower hall, Curuwen spent long hours before the Palantír, his face growing pale and his eyes hollow. When Arthelion questioned him, the old man answered only that he had seen visions, hosts gathering, fires being kindled, a shadow crowned with iron. One evening, Arthelion found Curuwen, trembling beside the covered stone. "It called to me," the old man whispered. "A voice of power, promising knowledge. It showed me the past, the glory of Númenor, the fall of the king's men. But its gift is a snare. I feel it reaching still." Arthelion gripped his arm. "Then swear to me you will not touch it again." Curuwen hesitated and said nothing. Outside, the horns of Minas Ithil sounded thrice in warning. Scouts came racing from the north, their horses lathered. "The Black Gate has opened," they cried. "Mordor's armies march." And as the sun sank behind the white mountains, the eastern sky burned red. Not with sunset, but with the light of countless fires. From the shadows of Mordor came the first roar of war, and the Tower of the Moon prepared for its last stand. The night was heavy with the scent of smoke and iron. From the east, the glow of fire spread like dawn reversed, a blood-red light staining the mountains. Minas Ithil's bells rang from the high spires, calling soldiers to the walls, while the watchfires of Gondor burned along the battlements like stars defying the darkness. Captain Arthelion strode through the courtyard, shouting orders to the garrison. Armor clanged, arrows were counted, and great vats of oil were hauled to the towers. Men moved swiftly, their faces pale in the flickering light, for all knew what was coming. Beyond the mountain passes, the armies of Mordor were on the march, and there would be no retreat from the Tower of the Moon. "Archers to the eastern wall," Arthelion cried. "Spearmen to the lower gate. Let none stand idle." Callan Mer, his young squire, ran to his side, his helm askew. "Captain, the lower gate is sealed, but the outer patrols, none have returned. Shall I send scouts?" "No more," Arthelion said grimly. "It is too late for scouting. We hold what we have." He turned his gaze eastward toward the black notch of the Morgul Pass. Even from afar, he could see flickers of movement in the red gloom, shapes like crawling shadows, banners that gleamed with no light of their own. "Mordor is awake again," he murmured. By midnight, the first assault began. From the valley below rose a sound like 1,000 drums, slow and deep. Then came the horns of Mordor, harsh, brazen calls that shook the air. Torches flared across the plain, and a black tide moved forward, a host of orcs and easterlings bearing ladders, rams, and siege towers. Arrows hissed from the walls of Minas Ithil, and the first ranks of the enemy fell, but more came behind them, chanting in foul tongues. "Loose, loose!" cried the captains, and a hail of shafts descended. The walls trembled as stones struck, but the tower held firm. The defenders fought fiercely, casting down ladders, overturning siege rams, and driving the enemy back with fire. For a time, hope flared, but in the darkest hour before dawn, the air itself seemed to grow cold. A shadow passed over the moon, and all light dimmed. Then from the enemy's ranks, a new sound arose. high, shrill and cruel, like the cry of some unseen beast. The soldiers froze. Arthalion felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. He knew that sound. "The Nazgul," he whispered. Out of the darkness they came, 9 riders on black steeds, cloaked and crowned, their eyes invisible yet burning with malice. They rode above the host like living shadows, and wherever they passed, courage failed. Arrows veered aside as if blown by wind, and men dropped their weapons, trembling. Arthalion drew his sword and lifted it high, though his arm shook. "Stand fast! Stand for Gondor!" His voice steadied those nearest him, and the defenders rallied, loosing volleys at the black riders. But the arrows vanished into the night without harm. The Nazgul raised their swords and spoke words that burned the air, and the gates of Minas Ithil groaned beneath the echo of their power. In the tower hall, Master Curuven stood before the Palantír once more, ignoring the guards who begged him to leave. The stone blazed with inner light, swirling with visions of fire and ruin. "Show me!" he cried. "Show me the truth of this darkness." Within the crystal depths, an image formed, a vast throne of iron and flame, and upon it a shadow crowned with fire. A voice spoke from beyond hearing, cold, commanding, full of dreadful promise. "Serve me, and you shall see all. Resist and be forgotten." Curuven fell to his knees, his mind aflame. The stone pulsed like a heart, and through it the eye of Sauron opened. Below, the battle raged on. A battering ram, shaped like a beast of bronze, struck the gates again and again, its blows timed with the beating of the enemy drums. Each strike sent shudders through the walls. Arthalion, bleeding from a cut across his brow, called for reinforcements, but already men were falling back. The lower towers were aflame, and the black archers of Mordor poured volleys into the courtyard. Calanmir came running. "Captain! The warden! He's in the hall! He's opened the Palantír again!" Arthalion swore and raced toward the heart of the tower. He burst into the hall to find Curuven, standing amid a circle of light, his face white and drawn, the Palantír blazing before him. "Curuven!" Arthalion shouted. "Close it! Do you hear me? Close it before it consumes you." The old man turned, and in his eyes burned madness. "He speaks to me, Captain, the Lord of Gifts. He shows me what is to come, the victory of the new age. We can be spared if we yield the stone." Arthalion advanced, sword raised. "You speak with the enemy. He would twist your mind and make you his pawn." But even as he spoke, a thunderous crash shook the tower. The gates had fallen. From the courtyard rose the screams of men and the clash of steel. Arthalion turned to rush back to the fight, but Curuven cried out and seized the Palantír. A great wind swept through the hall, dousing every torch. The moonlight vanished, and all was black save for the terrible glow of the stone. Through that light came a shadow, vast, unseen, but real. The eye looked upon Minas Ithil. Arthalion staggered back as a wave of dread crushed his heart. His sword slipped from his hand. The voice of Sauron filled the hall, deep and mocking. "Faithful servant, the tower of the moon shall fall, and its light shall be mine." With a scream, Curuven collapsed, clutching the stone to his breast. Outside, the Nazgul swept over the battlements, and the last defenders of Minas Ithil were driven to the inner keep. The walls cracked, towers fell, and the moon that had once shone upon white stone was veiled in smoke and flame. Arthalion gathered the few who still lived and barred the doors of the hall. "This is our last stand," he said. "We fight for Gondor, and for the light of the West." Even as he spoke, the enemy's horn sounded again, closer now, echoing through the ruin. The Tower of the Moon was dying, but its heart still burned with defiance. And upon that night, as the firelight flickered upon shattered marble and blood-stained banners, the fate of the Palantír and of Minas Ithil hung by a thread. The dawn came red as blood, if dawn it could be called. Smoke veiled the mountains, and the sun rose dim behind it, casting a sickly light over the ruins of the outer walls. The banners of Gondor, once bright with silver and white, hung torn and blackened by flame. From the heights of Minas Ithil, one could see the valley below, crawling with dark shapes, an endless host of orcs, trolls, and men of the east. The air trembled with their chanting, the drums pounding like a heartbeat of doom. Arthalion stood upon the highest parapet of the inner keep, his sword stained and dull. Around him, the few surviving men of the garrison tended to the wounded, their faces hollow with exhaustion. They had fought through the night, holding the tower against overwhelming odds. And now, though the outer walls had fallen, they clung to the citadel itself, the last refuge of the defenders. Calanmere brought water to him, his hands trembling. "Captain," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the men are weary. We have no food left, and little water. The wounded beg for mercy. What shall we do?" Arthalion drank deeply, then set the cup aside. "We do what men of Gondor have always done," he said. "We stand while we have strength. We hold until the last." But even as he spoke, a horn sounded from below, a single, clear note that was not of Gondor's making. The enemy had drawn back from the lower court, and in their place came riders, black-armored and silent. At their head was a figure tall and terrible, his helm wrought like a crown of iron. No word was spoken, but the fear that went before him was worse than any sound. "The Witch King," Arthalion murmured, "the Lord of the Nazgul himself." The shadowed figure dismounted and lifted a gauntleted hand. "Men of Gondor," he called, his voice echoing like a bell of doom. "Your city is fallen. Your king cannot save you. Surrender the Palantír, and I shall grant you mercy. Resist, and you shall be swept away into the darkness." His words rolled through the stone like thunder. Some of the younger soldiers fell to their knees, their courage breaking. But Arthalion strode to the wall and called down, his voice ringing true, despite the terror that gripped his heart. "Begone, servant of the shadow. Minas Ithil stands in the name of the kings of Gondor. You shall not have the stone, while one man yet draws breath within these walls." A cruel laugh echoed from below. "So be it," said the Witch King. "Then your tower shall become a tomb." The drums began anew, and the siege engines moved forward. Great stones crashed against the walls, splintering white marble and sending clouds of dust into the air. Fireballs arched overhead, bursting upon the roofs. The defenders fought with desperate valor, but each hour the enemy crept closer. In the tower hall, Curuin sat motionless beside the Palantír. His eyes were open, but they no longer saw the world around him. He muttered to himself, words of forgotten speech, and the light of the stone pulsed faintly in rhythm with his breath. Arthalion came to him, shaking his shoulder. "Curuin, the enemy is upon us. We must move the stone. Help me." But the old man turned slowly, and his gaze was empty. "He has shown me the truth," he whispered. "All that is and all that will be. There is no victory for Gondor, only submission and survival." "You are bewitched," cried Arthalion. "Would you betray us all?" Curuin smiled faintly, a sad, broken smile. "You do not understand, Captain. He needs only the stone. If we yield it, he will spare the rest. I have seen it." "Lies," Arthalion said. "Sauron spares none." Before he could say more, a shout rose from the corridor beyond. The enemy had breached the lower gate. Steel clashed, and the cries of men rang through the halls. Arthelion drew his sword and turned to Callan Mer, who had followed him. "Guard the warden," he commanded. "If he tries to take the Palantír, stop him." Then he was gone, running to join the battle. The inner court was chaos. The great door had splintered under the blows of a troll, and black armored soldiers poured through the breach. Arthelion met them in the gateway, his sword flashing, cutting down one foe after another. His men fought beside him, shouting the names of their fathers, but they were too few. One by one they fell, until the courtyard was littered with the dead. Still Arthelion fought on, his strength driven by fury and grief. A spear struck his side, but he broke it off and pressed forward, driving the enemy back step by step. For a moment, it seemed the tide might turn. Then a great shadow loomed over him. The Witch King had entered the court. His black blade burned with a pale fire, and the air grew cold around him. Arthelion faced him, lifting his sword though his arm shook. "Captain of Gondor," said the ring-wraith, his voice soft as silk and sharp as iron. "You have fought well, but your valor is in vain. Give me the stone, and I will grant you peace." Arthelion spat blood upon the stones. "I will grant you only this, defiance." With a cry, he struck, his blade ringing against the Nazgul's sword. For a heartbeat, they stood locked in battle, steel against shadow. Then the ring-wraith's power surged, and Arthelion was thrown back as if struck by lightning. His sword shattered, and he fell to his knees, gasping. The Witch King raised his hand for the final blow, but in that instant, from the hall above came a wild cry. "Take it! Take it and spare us!" Curuwen appeared on the balcony, the Palantír cradled in his arms, its light flickering like a dying star. "Great Lord," he cried, "I bring you the gift you seek. Grant us mercy." "No!" shouted Arthelion, forcing himself to his feet. "Curuwen, stop!" But it was too late. The old man stumbled down the steps, clutching the stone. As he reached the court, the Witch King turned his gaze upon him. Curuwen fell to his knees, offering the Palantír like an offering to a god. The ringwraith took it in his hand, and the light within it died, replaced by a cold inner darkness. A terrible laugh echoed through the ruins. "The tower is fallen," the Witch King said, "and the moon is mine." Arthelion staggered forward, blood running from his wounds. "Curuwen, what have you done?" The old man looked up at him, tears streaking his face. "I sought to save us," he whispered. "But there is no mercy in him." Then a black arrow struck him through the breast, and he fell beside the captain. The Witch King turned away, holding the Palantír aloft. "Henceforth," he proclaimed, "this tower shall be called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Black Sorcery. Let its light be a curse upon the lands of the West." As he spoke, a wind rose from the east, carrying with it a foul vapor that spread through the streets. The white stone of Minas Ithil darkened, and a pale, ghostly light began to seep from its windows. Arthelion crawled to Curuwen's side, his breath failing. "Forgive me," the old man murmured. "I was blind." "There is nothing to forgive," Arthelion said weakly, "only to remember." Above them, the moon vanished behind clouds, and the tower shuddered as if in mourning. Then all was dark. Only Callan Mer, hidden among the fallen, survived to see the dawn. A dawn over a city transformed. The once white spires now glowed with sickly green fire, and the banners of Gondor had been replaced by black pennons bearing the eye. Minas Ithil was no more. The Tower of the Moon had become the Tower of Sorcery, and the Palantír was lost to Sauron. The smoke of the ruined tower drifted westward over the land of Ithilien, curling like dark fingers through the forests. Where once the scent of cedar and wild thyme filled the air, now there was only ash and the stench of burning stone. Minas Ithil, the fair tower of the moon, had fallen, and its light was turned to shadow. The cries of the dying still echoed faintly through the valleys, mingled with the harsh laughter of the victors. Calanmere awoke amid the ruin. The air was thick and cold, and his head throbbed with pain. He lay among the bodies of the slain, beneath a shattered archway that had half collapsed in the night. For a long time he did not move, for fear that the Black Riders still lingered. But the silence around him was heavy and strange, broken only by the groan of stone and the crackle of distant fires. He rose unsteadily to his feet. The courtyard was strewn with corpses, men of Gondor and beasts of Mordor alike. Above, the once white spires of the tower now shimmered with an unearthly light, pale green and cold, casting no warmth. A dark mist coiled about the battlements like smoke that would never clear. Calanmere stumbled toward the inner hall, calling softly, "Captain Arthelion!" But there was no answer. He found the captain at last, lying near the broken steps of the tower hall, his armor scorched, his sword shattered beside him. Arthelion's eyes were half open, and when Calanmere knelt beside him, a faint smile touched his lips. "You live," he murmured, voice rough with pain. "Then Gondor still has hope." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "The city is lost, Captain. Minas Ithil is gone." Arthelion coughed, and blood stained his lips. "Aye, lost. But you mustn't fall into despair. Listen to me, Calanmere. You must flee this place. Carry word to Osgiliath. Tell the king that the Palantír is taken, and that the moon has fallen. Gondor must know." "I will not leave you," said Calanmere fiercely. "You must," Arthelion said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "My road ends here. Yours does not. Go now, while the shadows still linger in their victory and do not yet look to the west. Take the hidden path beneath the wall, the one we kept for retreat. You remember?" Calanmere nodded through his tears. "I remember." "Then go. And when you reach Osgiliath, tell them we stood to the end. Tell them the light did not yield without a fight." Arthelion's breath grew shallow. His hand reached for Calanmere's, and their fingers clasped briefly before his strength failed. The young squire bowed his head, and when he lifted it again, the captain's eyes were still and calm, as though he looked upon the stars of Númenor in his final dream. Calanmere took Arthelion's sword hilt, though the blade was broken, and bound it at his side. Then he covered his captain with a cloak and rose to leave the city. The lower gates were open now, but what lay beyond was worse than death. The valley was black with the army of Mordor. Fires burned in the fields, and great engines of war stood idle, their task complete. The Nazgûl had departed, taking the Palantír into the east, but their dread still hung in the air. Calanmere moved like a shadow through the ruins, careful not to draw the attention of the enemy. Twice he hid beneath the bodies of the slain, as bands of orcs passed by, cackling and looting. Once, a troll lumbered so close that its breath stirred the dust beside him. But the lad was swift and silent, and as night deepened, he found the hidden stair behind the lower keep. It led down into a tunnel carved long ago by Isildur's masons, opening far below the cliffs into the wild forests of Ithilien. He crept through darkness for what felt like hours, guided by the faint glow of the stars through cracks in the stone. When at last he emerged into the open, the air struck his face like a blessing, cold, clean, and filled with the scent of pine. Behind him, Minas Ithil loomed upon the mountain's flank, a ghostly vision against the sky. Its walls gleamed faintly, but not with the white light of the moon. Now they glowed a sickly green, and where once bells had sung, there was only the whisper of dark enchantment. The very stones seemed alive with evil. Calanmare looked upon it with sorrow and fear. "Goodbye, my captain," he whispered. "Goodbye, fair tower." Then he turned and vanished into the trees. For 2 days he journeyed westward through the woods, avoiding the roads and the open plains. The land was silent, as if holding its breath, and strange shadows moved among the trees. Once he heard the cry of a Nazgul far above, and he threw himself beneath a fallen log until the sound passed. Hunger gnawed at him, but he dared not light a fire. At last, on the 3rd day, he reached the river and saw the towers of Osgiliath gleaming in the distance. Weary and near collapse, he crossed the old stone bridge and came to the gate. The guards, seeing his torn armor and the emblem of Minas Ithil upon his cloak, drew him in at once. "By the valor, boy," said one. "What has happened? We saw the fires from afar. What news?" Calanmare could barely speak. "Minas Ithil has fallen," he whispered. "The Palantír, the stone of Isildur, is taken. The captain is dead. The city is lost." Word spread quickly through Osgiliath, and soon Calanmare was brought before King Ernil himself. The hall of the king was bright with torches, yet when the lad finished his tale, a shadow seemed to fall upon the room. "So it has come to this," said the king at last, his face grave. "The Tower of the Moon has fallen, and Sauron's hand grows stronger. Gondor shall not forget those who perished there. Their names will be sung in the halls of the faithful." He rose and placed a hand upon Calanmare's shoulder. "You have done a hard thing, my boy. Rest now, and grieve if you must. Gondor owes you more than you know." But that night, as the fires burned low and the city slept, Calanmare climbed the walls and looked eastward. There, far beyond the river and the shadowed hills, he saw a strange light pulsing against the sky, green and cold, like a star fallen from heaven. It flickered atop the mountains, where Minas Ithil once stood. And as he watched, it seemed to him that the light shifted and moved, like the gaze of an unseen watcher searching westward. He shuddered and turned away. For though the Tower of the Moon had fallen, its spirit lived on, but not in the form of hope. The fair light of Ithil had become the dreadful gleam of Morgul, and the eye of Sauron had found a new mirror through which to look upon the world. Thus ended the last watch of Minas Ithil, and thus began the long dread that would haunt Gondor for many generations to come. Yet even in despair, a single spark endured, the memory of courage and the promise that light, though swallowed by shadow, is never wholly lost. Winter came early to Gondor that year. The winds from the east blew chill and sharp across Ithilien, and the woods that had once been green with life grew silent and grey. The great towers of Osgiliath stood watch upon the river, their stones damp with frost. Yet no peace lay within those walls, for tidings from the east had cast a long shadow over the hearts of men. Minas Ithil, once the shining guardian of Gondor's borders, was gone. In its place had risen a fortress of fear, whose windows glowed like sickly lanterns in the night. The people whispered of lights that danced across the mountains, and of a strange green mist that crept down into the vales, slaying the grass and dimming the stars. None dared venture near the Morgul Vale now. Even the bravest scouts returned pale and trembling, or did not return at all. In the citadel of Osgiliath, King Ernil sat before the fire, his face drawn with care. Beside him stood Calanmare, no longer the trembling boy who had fled the ruins of Minas Ithil, but a young man hardened by grief and memory. His eyes, once bright with wonder, now held the cold reflection of loss. "You have seen what we have lost," said the king quietly. "Tell me, Calanmere, what dwells there now? Do the fires still burn in the vale?" "They burn without ceasing, my lord," Calanmere answered, "and the tower glows by night with a light not of this world. No sound of bell or song comes from it, only whispers carried on the wind. I think the spirits of the fallen wander there, bound by the will of the enemy." Ernil's hand tightened upon the arm of his chair. "The enemy grows bold. If Sauron now holds the Palantír of Ithil, his eye may already seek us. We must guard our own stones well, or they too will betray us." He rose and crossed to the tall windows, gazing eastward. Beyond the Anduin, the land lay dim and shrouded. "Long have I feared that Mordor would stir again," he said. "Now the proof lies before us. Yet Gondor cannot abandon Ithilien altogether. Its forests are our shield, and its people still look to us for protection. We must send the rangers back into the wild, to watch, to warn, and if need be, to strike." Calanmere bowed. "Then send me, my king. I know the passes. I know the hidden paths." Ernil turned, studying him. "You have lost much, my lad. I would not send you again into that darkness, if it can be spared." Calanmere's gaze did not waver. "I lost my captain, my home, and my brothers. But while I live, I will not see Gondor's light fade without struggle. Let me go." The king's expression softened. "So be it. You shall ride with the rangers of Ithilien. May the valor guard your path." Thus it was that Calanmere returned to the wild, leading a small company of rangers eastward through the forests of Ithilien. They moved silently beneath the bare trees, cloaked in green and grey. For weeks they kept to the shadows, watching the movements of the enemy across the plains. The land itself seemed changed, corrupted by the sorcery that flowed from Minas Morgul. Where clear streams had once run, now pools of stagnant water lay. The birds had fled, and the air tasted of iron. At night, a dim green glow rose from the valley like a ghostly dawn, and the rangers dared not look upon it for long. One evening, as they camped in a hollow near the edge of the woods, a tremor passed beneath their feet. A low, pulsing rhythm like the beating of a distant heart. Calanmere froze. "The drums," he whispered. "They are marching again." From far off came a faint sound, the echo of horns, cold and cruel. The rangers climbed the ridge, and from its crest they beheld the valley below. There, under the shadow of Morgul, columns of soldiers were moving, trolls, orcs, and men in dark armor, bearing strange standards. "They go west," said one of the rangers, "toward the river." "A raid, perhaps," said another. But Calanmere shook his head. "No, this is more than a raid. They march in strength. The Dark Lord tests our strength again." The company withdrew into the forest, but their retreat was not swift enough. Before dawn, black scouts swept through the woods, swift and silent as wolves. One by one the rangers were hunted down, until only Calanmere and 2 others remained. They fought in the shadow of the great trees, striking from behind with bow and blade, but the numbers against them were too great. At last, Calanmere found himself cornered beside a narrow stream. His sword was notched, his arm bleeding. The orcs closed in, snarling. He cut down one, then another, but a spear thrust caught him in the side, and he fell. The world spun, and darkness closed over him. When he awoke, he was lying in a dark cavern, bound and bruised. A single torch burned nearby, casting flickering light upon the stone. 2 orcs squatted beside him, gnawing bones. At the far end of the cavern, a tall figure stood cloaked in black, its face hidden. "So," the figure said in a cold voice, "another whelp of Gondor crawls in the dirt. Tell me, boy, What do they know of Morgul's power? Do they fear it? Calanmere stared at him with defiance. They fear nothing but cowardice. The figure laughed softly. Brave words for one so young. You shall serve another purpose then. You shall see what your precious tower has become. The orcs dragged him outside. The night air struck him like ice, but the sight that met his eyes chilled him more deeply still. The valley of Morgul spread before him, bathed in a ghastly green glow. The tower loomed high above, its once fair walls now blackened and cracked, yet shining with an unholy radiance. The air hummed with power, and strange whispers echoed through the cliffs. A shadow passed above the tower, a Nazgul upon its winged beast, circling like a vulture. Calanmere's captor lifted his face toward it, and bowed low. "Behold," he said, "Minas Morgul, the new jewel of the East. The light of Ithil burns now for the Lord of Shadows. The Palantír rests within, and through it his gaze stretches far. Even now he watches the hearts of men." Calanmere turned away, his spirit wrung with grief. "Take heart," the figure said mockingly. "You shall live long enough to see the darkness spread to your beloved Osgiliath." But the youth, though bound and beaten, met his enemy's gaze without flinching. "Even in darkness the stars endure," he said. "And so shall Gondor." The figure's eyes gleamed from beneath the hood, and for a moment there was silence. Then he turned to the orcs. "Take him below. Let him see the workings of the tower. Let him understand the futility of light." As they dragged him toward the gates of Minas Morgul, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and a great horn sounded from within the fortress, deep and terrible, like the calling of the grave. And though Calanmere could not yet know it, that horn would soon echo across the lands of Gondor, heralding a darkness that would test every soul of the West. The iron gates of Minas Morgul yawned open with a slow groan, as though the mountain itself sighed in pain. Calanmere was dragged across the threshold, the stench of death and sorcery thick upon the air. The guards that watched there were not holy orcs. Some were creatures neither living nor dead, clad in blackened mail, their faces pale as wax and their eyes hollow. They moved with the silence of ghosts, and the touch of their hands burned like frost. Within, the tower's halls were a vision of horror. The marble of old had been twisted by fire and spellcraft until it gleamed with a faint green hue. Strange sigils burned upon the walls, shifting and writhing as if alive. From hidden chambers came the low sound of chanting, a rhythm that beat in time with Calanmere's heart until he could scarcely breathe. The orcs shoved him forward, through corridors where no sunlight had ever walked. He glimpsed tall shapes gliding between the pillars. Men once, perhaps, but now little more than shadows, their forms wreathed in mist. The air reeked of sulphur and despair. At last they came to a vast hall beneath the central spire. Here the light of Morgul burned brightest, casting the chamber in eerie radiance. At its center stood a great dais of obsidian, and upon it a black throne wrought in the likeness of the crescent moon. There sat a figure, tall and terrible, wrapped in robes of deep green and silver, though the color seemed sickly and wrong. The face was hidden by a mask of steel shaped like a moon's half-face, one side serene, the other twisted in anguish. Behind him, upon a pedestal of dark stone, rested the Palantír of Ithil. It shone no longer with clear light, but with a dim red fire that seemed to pulse like a living heart. The orcs flung Calanmere to his knees before the throne. The masked figure rose, his voice soft but filled with power. "So," he said, "another of Gondor's sons dares the veil. Tell me your name, child of the West." Calanmere lifted his head, though fear gripped his heart. Calanmere of Ithilien, he said. Ranger of Gondor, servant of King Ernil. Brave, then, murmured the Lord of Morgul. Brave and foolish. Did you think to spy upon us unseen? The eyes of the Lord of the Rings see far now, and the stone of Ithil serves his will. He turned, and the red light of the Palantír flickered as though it answered him. Calanmere's gaze followed it despite himself, and for an instant he glimpsed within the crystal depths the image of a vast shadow spreading across the land. The rivers burned, and the white towers of Osgiliath crumbled beneath black flame. A great eye opened above it all, searching, consuming. He cried out and turned away. The figure laughed softly. You see now the truth. The West cannot stand. Even the wise shall bow before the One. I see lies, Calanmere spat. I see the deceit of Sauron, who fears the courage of men. The Lord of Morgul's hand tightened upon the arm of his throne. Courage, he hissed. Courage is nothing before eternity. You shall learn that soon enough. He motioned to the guards. Take him to the lower vaults. Let him look upon the forges of Morgul and know the fate of all who defy the will of the Dark Lord. The orcs dragged Calanmere away. Down, down he went, through winding stairs that led into the very roots of the mountain. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, until at last they entered a cavern vast as a cathedral. Here the fires of Morgul burned, but their flames were not red or gold. They glowed green and white, cold and hungry. Shapes moved among the forges, twisted smiths, their flesh scarred by sorcery, hammering black steel that rang with a sound like wailing. The orcs bound Calanmere to a pillar and left him there. For long hours he watched the forges burn, hearing the clang of hammers echo endlessly. From time to time, he caught sight of pale figures being led into the flames, men, perhaps prisoners of war, whose screams rose and faded until only the ringing of iron remained. At length, he heard soft footsteps. A woman stood before him, cloaked in grey, her hair as dark as night. Her eyes shone faintly in the gloom. You are not one of them, Calanmere said hoarsely. No, she answered. Not yet. Who are you? She hesitated, then said, Once I was called Lareth. I served in the houses of healing in Ithil long ago, before the darkness came. When the tower fell, I was taken. Now I serve here, or seem to. Her voice trembled slightly, as though the memory still hurt. Why are you here? Calanmere asked. She looked toward the forges. The Lord of Morgul seeks to bind the living to his will. Not all who serve him are dead. Some are kept alive to tend his works, twisted by his poison until they forget who they were. I remember still, but for how long, I cannot say. Calanmere's heart ached at her words. Then help me escape, he said quietly. If you remember what it means to be free, help me carry word to Gondor. Lareth's eyes filled with sorrow. Escape? None who enter Morgul leave again. The very air will betray you. Yet, she looked around, listening. There is an old passage that runs beneath the forges. It leads to the river that once flowed through the valley. It is half collapsed, but if the guards are distracted, you may find your way. Why tell me this? Because I will not see another soul bound to this curse, she said simply. If you reach Gondor, tell them that Minas Ithil is not merely lost, it lives still in torment, and tell them my name, that they may remember those who were taken. She reached up, cutting his bonds with a shard of metal. Go, quickly. The forges will shift soon. Calanmere took her hand. Come with me. She shook her head. I cannot. My chains are deeper than these. Go while there is time. He hesitated only a moment, then slipped into the shadows. Through the narrow tunnels he crept, guided by the faint rush of water. The ground shook above as hammers struck in rhythm, masking his footsteps. Once he heard shouts behind him. The guards had discovered his absence. But the passage ahead opened at last into a fissure where a thin stream flowed, cold and clear. He plunged into it, following its course through the darkness until the light of the valley appeared ahead, faint and green. The stream burst forth at last into the open air beneath the cliffs, and Calanmire stumbled out, gasping into the night. Behind him, the tower loomed, its fires burning like unholy stars. A shadow passed across the moon, and he felt the gaze of something vast and unseen sweep the valley. He pressed himself into the reeds by the river, trembling. Then, faint as a breath, a voice reached him on the wind. Lareth's voice, singing softly, a lament in the ancient tongue of Númenor. It rose and fell, echoing across the valley until it faded into silence. Calanmire turned away, his heart heavy, and began the long journey westward once more. But as he went, he knew that the shadow of Morgul would follow him always, and that the memory of its darkness would live long in the songs of Gondor. For within that cursed tower, the Palantír still burned with red fire, and through it the eye of Sauron watched, tireless and unblinking, over the lands of men. The journey from the Vale of Morgul was a blur of shadow and exhaustion. Calanmire moved through the ravaged woods of Ithil like a hunted beast, guided by instinct and the faint shimmer of stars above the black branches. His side burned where the orc's spear had wounded him, yet he dared not stop to tend it. Behind him, the dread of pursuit pressed like a physical weight. The forest had changed since he last walked it, as a ranger of Gondor. The trees leaned inward as though whispering to one another, and the ground was littered with strange fungi that glowed faintly in the dark. The birds were gone, and the air itself seemed hushed, as if fearful of the tower that brooded beyond the mountains. Even the moonlight, pale and cold, was tainted by a sickly hue that bled from the east. For 3 nights and 2 days he wandered, following no path save that which led him westward. His strength waned, and fever began to cloud his thoughts. Once he stumbled and fell, and for a moment he thought he heard Lareth's voice again, singing softly beside him. But when he lifted his head, there was only the wind in the grass. At last, on the 4th night, he reached the banks of the Anduin. The river shone beneath the stars, broad and silent, its dark waters flowing swift toward the sea. He collapsed upon the shore, too weak to cross. When dawn came, he was awakened by voices. Rough hands turned him over, and the glint of steel flashed in his eyes. "Hold, Denethor," said one. "He wears the cloak of Ithil." A young man leaned over him, stern of face, with grey eyes keen as flint. "Who are you?" he demanded. Calanmire struggled to speak. "A ranger, of the king, Minas Morgul." The man's expression softened slightly. "You've come from the east?" Calanmire nodded weakly. "I escaped the tower. The Palantír is taken. Morgul breeds an army beneath the mountain. They will march again soon." At that, a murmur rose among the soldiers. The young man gestured for silence. "You are safe now. Rest. I am Denethor, son of Ecthelion, warden of the city. You will come with us to Minas Tirith." And so Calanmire was borne southward by the company of Gondor, his wounds tended with herbs and clean water. The road was long, but as they journeyed, the land grew fairer. The forests of Ithil gave way to green hills and bright fields. By the time the white mountains rose before them, crowned with snow, Calanmire's strength had begun to return. When at last he beheld Minas Tirith, shining upon the slopes of Mindolluin, his heart stirred. Its 7 walls gleamed in the sunlight, proud and tall. Here, he thought, the shadow could not yet reach. In the citadel, he was brought before the king once more. Ernil's hair had grown grey since the fall of Minas Ithil, but his bearing was noble still. Denethor stood beside him, silent and watchful. Calanmere bowed low. "My lord," he said, "I bring word from the heart of the enemy's land. I have seen the works of Morgul and the fate of our people who were taken. The Palantír of Ithil burns now in the hand of the Dark Lord. Through it, he watches. Through it, he commands." A murmur spread through the gathered lords. Ernil's face hardened. "You have done what few could, Calanmere. Gondor is in your debt. Yet this news confirms our worst fear. If Sauron commands the Ithil stone, then every use of the other seeing stones may betray us. We must guard them well, or hide them from his sight." Denethor's eyes gleamed with unease. "Hide them. We should wield them, lest the enemy master all knowledge. With the stones, we might see his movements and thwart his design." But the king shook his head. "You are bold, Denethor, and wise beyond your years. Yet remember this, the will of Sauron is strong, and none may look into the Palantír without peril. Better blindness than deception." Calanmere stood silent, the memory of the stone's red light still burning behind his eyes. He thought of Corwin, the warden who had been seduced by its whisper, and he said quietly, "The stone does not serve the hand that holds it. It serves the eye that watches through it." Ernil nodded gravely. "Then so shall it be. Gondor will never again seek counsel from the stones. Let the eye gaze eastward, and let us bar our hearts against its lure." That night, a feast was held in Calanmere's honor. Yet though the hall was bright and the wine sweet, he felt no joy. Every note of music reminded him of the silence that hung over Minas Morgul, and every torchlight seemed a fragile thing, trembling against an unseen wind. When the feast ended, he withdrew to the ramparts and gazed eastward. The sky above Mordor burned faintly red. Denethor found him there. "You cannot sleep either?" he asked. Calanmere shook his head. "Not while that light burns. It feels as though it watches us." Denethor followed his gaze. "You have seen much darkness, yet you live." "That gives me hope." "Hope," Calanmere murmured. "It is a slender thing." The warden's voice was quiet. "It is all we have." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind sighed along the stone battlements, carrying with it the scent of snow from the mountain heights. At length, Calanmere turned. "I would serve Gondor still," he said. "If there is need, I will go again to Ithilien. The woods there must not be abandoned to the enemy." Denethor regarded him with respect. "Then you shall have your wish. A company of rangers will return to those lands to keep watch upon the borders of the shadow. You will lead them, Calanmere of Ithilien." The ranger bowed deeply. "I will go." And so it came to pass that within the same year, the rangers of Ithilien were reformed under Calanmere's command. From the ruins of their fallen city they drew their name, the Guardians of the Moon. By stealth and cunning, they kept the enemy's servants at bay, striking from the shadows and fading again into the wild. Yet always, when the wind blew from the east, a faint green light would glimmer across the land, and the men of Ithilien would fall silent. For they knew that within the cursed tower, their enemies gathered strength, and that one day, the hosts of Morgul would march again. Callan Moor stood often upon the cliffs above the Anduin, his cloak stirring in the wind, his gaze fixed upon the mountains, The memory of Lareth's song haunted him still, a voice of sorrow, echoing through time. And though the light of Minas Tirith shone bright behind him, he knew the war was far from over. For the eye never slept, and the shadow of Morgul lengthened with each passing year. But the hearts of men are stubborn things. While one soul still remembered the white tower of the moon, its fall was not complete. And in Calanmir's heart there burned a promise that someday, somehow, the light of Ithil would rise again. Spring came to Gondor, though it seemed a pale and haunted season. The trees of Ithilien bloomed with white flowers, but few dared to walk beneath their boughs. The men who lived along the river spoke of strange lights drifting through the night, of whispers that rose from the ruins, and of a chill that crept from the east even beneath the sun. Yet still, the rangers kept their watch. Calanmir moved among them, silent as a shadow, his cloak grey-green and his bow ever ready. He had built his refuge upon the western edge of the forest, a hidden stronghold beneath the roots of an ancient oak. From there, his company watched the Vale of Morgul and the Black Lands beyond. The years had changed him. The wound in his side had long since healed, but the scar remained, and in his eyes there lay a weariness that youth should never bear. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. To his men he was both leader and legend, for they knew he had escaped the very heart of Morgul and returned. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the sky turned red as flame, a horn sounded faintly across the hills. A lone rider approached, bearing the seal of the steward of Gondor. The rangers brought him to Calanmir. He bowed low. "My lord," the messenger said, "Denethor, son of Ithilien, sends you greeting. He bids you return to Minas Tirith with haste. The steward would speak with you of matters that cannot be written." Calanmir frowned, but nodded. "Tell him I come." Within the week he rode westward, leaving the command of the rangers to his second. The road was long and quiet, save for the murmur of the wind in the reeds. When at last he reached the White City, its walls shone like pearl beneath the moon, and the 7 levels of the citadel climbed the mountainside like steps to the sky. Denethor awaited him in the great hall. He had grown older, sterner, and though his bearing was proud, there was a shadow in his eyes that Calanmir did not remember. "Welcome, my friend," said Denethor. "It has been many years since we last spoke." Calanmir bowed. "Too many, my lord. What summons me from Ithilien?" Denethor gestured for him to follow. Together they walked to a small chamber, high in the tower, its windows narrow and its walls bare, save for a single table upon which stood a stone, covered with a black cloth. Calanmir stopped short. "You keep one of the Palantíri here," he said quietly. Denethor's gaze flicked to him. "Aye, the Anor stone. Long has it lain here, unused, gathering dust while the enemy grows stronger. My father forbade its use, fearing the will of the shadow. But I am not my father." Calanmir's heart grew cold. "You have looked into it." Denethor did not answer at once. "Tell me, Calanmir," he said at last. "You have seen the strength of the East. How are we to fight what we cannot see? The eye of Sauron is ever watchful. Must we fight blind?" "The stones do not serve us anymore," Calanmir said. "They are perilous. Through the Ithil stone, the enemy's will moves. Whatever you see within that one will not be truth. It will be what he wishes you to believe." Denethor's eyes flashed. "You fear what you do not understand." "No," Calanmir replied. "I fear what I have seen. I looked upon the Ithil stone once, my lord, and it nearly stole my soul. The eye is in it still. It watches all who dare to look." The steward's expression darkened. Do not think me weak. I am Denethor, son of Ithil, warden of the White Tower. If Sauron seeks to master me, he will find his match." Callanmere bowed his head, but his heart was heavy. He knew too well how cunning the shadow could be. That night, Denethor dismissed him, saying only, "Stay in the city for a few days. There are matters yet to discuss." Callanmere took his rest in the lower quarters, but sleep would not come. The thought of the Palantír burned in his mind. Long after midnight, he climbed once more to the high courtyard, where the cold wind swept from the mountains. From there he could see the White Tower rising above him, its pinnacle gleaming beneath the stars. A faint light flickered in the highest window, the steward's chamber. And for an instant, Callanmere thought he saw a darker glow within it, red as blood. He turned away, troubled. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the city. Strange news came from the east. The forces of Morgul were stirring again, building new roads through the mountains. Scouts spoke of black banners flying above the dead marshes, and of fell beasts circling in the night sky. One morning, Denethor summoned Callanmere again. His face was pale, and his eyes burned with restless fire. "The storm gathers," he said. "The enemy prepares for war. We have little time. I would have you return to Ithil and gather all who can bear arms. We must hold the crossings of the Anduin at any cost." Callanmere bowed. "It shall be done." He left the city that same day. Yet as he rode eastward, his thoughts were dark. He had seen the mark of pride in Denethor's eyes, and pride was a door the shadow could open with ease. When he reached the woods of Ithil, he found his men already watchful. They had seen movements upon the eastern bank, columns of orcs and men marching beneath the banner of the moon, black and sickly green. The night that followed was the first of many battles. From the Vale of Morgul poured the hosts of the Witch King, orcs in their thousands, trolls and pale riders mounted upon beasts of terror. The rangers fought like ghosts, striking from hidden places, vanishing before the enemy's might. The forests of Ithil ran red with blood. Yet still they held. Callanmere led his men through fire and shadow, his sword flashing beneath the moonlight. Though many fell, they bought precious time for Gondor to rally. At dawn he climbed the hill above the river and looked eastward. The Tower of Morgul glowed in the distance, a wound upon the land. He knew that within it the Palantír still burned, feeding the will of the Dark Lord, showing him every movement of Gondor's strength. And far away, in Minas Tirith, Denethor sat in his high chamber, the Anor stone before him, gazing into its depths. Thus began the long war between the White City and the Tower of Sorcery, a war of eyes and unseen wills as much as of swords and fire. Callanmere could not know how many years it would last, nor how heavy the cost would be. But as he stood there, weary and blood-stained, he swore an oath beneath the cold dawn light. "So long as I breathe," he said, "the shadow shall not pass the river. For every stone they have taken, we will stand as living walls." The wind from the east carried a faint echo of laughter, cruel and distant. The light of Minas Morgul pulsed once, as if in answer. And the war of the Palantír had begun. The spring rains had ended, and summer crept upon Gondor with uneasy heat. Along the banks of the Anduin, the air hung thick with mist and the scent of ash. The war that had begun in whispers now thundered openly through the valleys. The black hosts of Minas Morgul had crossed the Morgul Vale in strength, and though the full wrath of Mordor had not yet come, the shadow lengthened day by day. Callanmere and his rangers fought a desperate campaign across Ithil, striking from glen and hollow, then fading into the forest. Yet even as they harried the enemy, they saw that the land itself was changing. Strange blights spread where the enemy passed. Flowers wilted, streams turned murky, and the very earth seemed to groan beneath the weight of evil. At twilight, when the greenish light of Minas Morgul glimmered upon the horizon, men spoke little. They sharpened their blades in silence, for all knew that soon the great war would come. One night, as Calanmere sat beside a dying fire, his second, a dark-haired ranger named Mardil, approached quietly. "Captain," he said, "a messenger has come from Osgiliath. He bears the steward's seal." Calanmere rose at once. The rider was weary and dust-stained, his horse lathered. "Speak," said Calanmere. "What word from the White City?" The messenger bowed low. "The steward commands that you hold Ithilian at all costs. Reinforcements will come from Palantír and Losanak, but the bridges must not fall. Above all, he bids you beware the Witch King, for his power waxes, and he now leads the hosts of Morgul in person." Calanmere's heart tightened. "Then the 9 ride again." The messenger hesitated. "There is more. It is said that the steward grows restless. Some whisper he spends his nights in the tower alone. They say he gazes into the seeing stone." Calanmere dismissed him with thanks, though his spirit sank like a stone. He had feared this. Denethor, proud and strong, might yet prove too proud for his own salvation. That night, Calanmere climbed to the ridge above the forest. From there, he could see the faint light of Minas Morgul pulsing like a heartbeat, casting a sickly pall across the eastern sky. He thought of the 2 Palantíri, one in the hands of the enemy, the other in the hands of Gondor's lord, and shuddered. What might pass between them in the dark hours, none could tell. By dawn, the horns of war echoed through the forest. The first wave of Morgul's host had come. Orcs by the thousands poured through the ruined passes, their armor black and their banners stitched with the crescent moon of their accursed tower. Trolls marched beside them, dragging engines of war. Calanmere rallied his men upon the high ground near the river. "We hold here," he cried. "For Gondor and the west." The rangers answered with a shout, and the first arrows flew. The battle that followed was fierce and long. Orcs fell by the hundreds, black blood soaking the grass. Yet for each that died, 2 more took its place. Calanmere fought in the thick of it, his sword flashing white in the gloom. 3 times the enemy drove upon them, and 3 times they were thrown back. But as the sun sank behind the mountains, a great cry rose from the east. The men faltered, for upon the ridge above them a shadow had appeared, tall and crowned, mounted upon a black steed whose eyes burned red. The air grew cold, and the will of men wavered. "The Witch King!" someone cried. The Nazgul raised his sword, and a sound like thunder rolled across the field. The courage of many failed, and they fled toward the river. Calanmere stood firm, though his heart was frozen with dread. He lifted his bow and loosed an arrow, but it vanished into smoke. Then the Witch King spoke, his voice a whisper that filled the world. "Foolish sons of Númenor," he said, "your time is ended. The Tower of the Moon has fallen. Soon shall the Tower of the Sun follow." Calanmere set his jaw, not while one sword remains in Gondor's hand. He rallied his men, forming a shield wall along the riverbank. The Witch King's host pressed forward, but the rangers fought like trapped lions. The battle raged into the night, until the moon rose pale above the trees. At last, a horn sounded from the west, deep, clear, and noble. Reinforcements from Osgiliath had come. The enemy, caught between river and hill, began to falter. With a final shout, Calanmere led the charge that broke their line. When dawn came, the field was strewn with the dead, and the survivors of Gondor stood weary but victorious. Yet their triumph was bitter, for many had fallen, and the valley stank of death. Mardil came to Calanmere, his face grave. "We have held them," he said, "but not for long. More come from the east. They will cross again within days." Calanmere looked toward the horizon. The light of Morgul still glowed there, unbroken. "Then we will hold again," he said quietly, "until the end." That night, while the men tended their wounds, Calanmere walked alone by the river. The wind carried faint echoes from the east, distant horns, a low chant like the rumbling of the earth itself. He knew the Witch King would not rest. As he watched, he saw something gleam in the dark water, a shard of polished stone, smooth and black as glass. He knelt and lifted it from the shallows. It was cold to the touch, and faint light stirred within it, green and red like the depths of a dying fire. His heart leapt in fear. Could it be a fragment of the Ithil stone, or merely some cursed token cast from Morgul's forge? He cast it away at once, watching it sink beneath the current. "No more of your lies," he murmured. When he returned to camp, a strange silence had fallen. The men were uneasy. Some claimed to hear voices in the night. Others said the moon itself seemed dimmer. Calanmore knew that the shadow of Morgul stretched even here. The war was no longer of swords alone. It was a battle of hearts and wills. Days later, a second messenger came from the White City. His face was pale, his horse foam-flecked. "The steward bids you withdraw," he said breathlessly. "The bridges at Osgiliath are to be fortified. All forces west of the river must fall back." Calanmere was astonished. "Withdraw? We have bled for this ground. Why yield it now?" "The steward has seen the truth," said the messenger. "He says the enemy's strength is too great. Gondor must conserve its might for the defense of Minas Tirith itself." Mardil cursed under his breath, but Calanmere only nodded. "Then we obey. Gather the men." That night they burned their outposts, leaving nothing the enemy could use. As the flames rose, Calanmere looked east one last time. Minas Morgul glowed brighter than ever, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw within its light the faint reflection of a great eye, watching, waiting, patient. He turned away, leading his weary men across the river. Thus the forests of Ithilien were abandoned to the shadow, and the Vale of Morgul became a land of death. Yet Calanmere vowed that he would return, for though the darkness deepened, his heart still clung to a single hope, that one day, long after his bones had turned to dust, the Tower of the Moon would shine again with silver light, and Gondor would reclaim the brightness that had been stolen. Autumn descended upon Gondor, painting the fields of Pelennor with a dim gold that seemed already fading. The air held the scent of smoke from far-off battles, and though the harvest came, few sang in the fields. For across the river, the land of Ithilien lay silent, swallowed by the creeping dark. The people of the city whispered that the white tree itself had grown pale, as though the very life of Gondor were ebbing away. In Minas Tirith, Denethor brooded within his high chamber. The war had not yet reached the gates, yet its shadow filled every corridor. He had become a man of silence, sleeping little, walking the halls by candlelight long after midnight. When his counselors spoke, he listened with cold patience, but there was fire behind his eyes, a flame that none could meet for long. And always, in the still hours before dawn, the servants saw light from the topmost window of the tower, sometimes white as moonlight, sometimes red as blood. Calanmere had returned to the city with his men, battered but unbroken. They had fought across the forests and the river's edge until their strength was spent, and only when the steward's orders came had they fallen back. For a time, they were given rest in the lower circles, tending their wounds and sharpening to their blades. But Calanmir's heart knew no peace. The memory of the Witch King's shadow haunted his dreams. One morning, as the first chill winds of winter blew from the mountains, Denethor summoned him once more. "You have served Gondor well," said the steward. "Without your watch in Ithilien, the enemy would have crossed sooner, and the city would already be besieged. Yet the war is far from ended. The eye grows ever nearer. Tell me, Calanmir, do you still fear the stones?" Calanmir bowed. "I fear not the stones themselves, my lord, but the will that governs them. Through the Ithil stone the enemy sees all. Even now his gaze may reach us." Denethor smiled, though there was no mirth in it. "So you say. Yet I have looked, and what I saw was not despair, but knowledge. The armies of the West must not fight blind, like children groping in the dark. With the Palantír, I can see the movements of our foes. I know their strength and their weakness. Knowledge is power, Calanmir, and power is what Gondor needs." Calanmir's voice was steady. "And what of the cost, my lord? Every vision you behold through that stone, the enemy may shape to his design. He will show you truth enough to lead you astray." The steward's eyes flashed. "Do you think me weak? I am not Curuin, to be deceived by shadows. I am Denethor, son of Ithilien, lord of the City of Kings. I will not bow before the will of Sauron." Calanmir knelt, bowing his head. "Forgive me. I speak only from fear for my people." Denethor turned away, pacing to the window. Fear can be a chain or a weapon. Which it becomes depends on the hand that holds it. Go now. Return to your men. The day will come when we must stand again upon the walls, and I would have every sword ready. Calanmir left the chamber, heavy of heart. He could not shake the sense that something vast and unseen had entered the city, coiling through its stones like smoke. That night, he walked the outer walls alone. The moon hung low, veiled in thin clouds. Far to the east, the glow of Minas Morgul shimmered faintly, casting a sickly light upon the clouds above the Duath. He thought of the tower as it had been, Minas Ithil, bright and pure, its walls shining silver beneath the stars. He thought of his captain, Arthalion, who had died defending it, and of Lareth's voice in the depths of the Morgul vaults. His hands clenched at the memory, and he whispered, "You shall not have all that we were, not while one heart in Gondor still beats." Days turned to weeks, and the dread grew. Scouts returned from the eastern marches bearing grim tidings. "The valley burns," they said. "The hosts of Morgul stir again. The Witch King gathers his armies for war." The great beacons of Gondor were made ready, their firewood stacked high. Men labored upon the walls, repairing the stones, sharpening pikes, and stringing new bows. The people of the city watched in silence, for they too felt the storm building. Then, one evening, as the sun sank red behind Mindolluin, a messenger came from the north, bearing news that chilled every heart. "The enemy's banners are moving toward Osgiliath. The Witch King himself leads them." Denethor's orders came swiftly. "We march at dawn. The bridges must not fall. Calanmir, take your company and hold the eastern shore until reinforcements arrive." Calanmir bowed. "It shall be done." He rode out with his rangers once more, crossing the fields of Pelennor beneath the rising moon. The wind carried with it the scent of decay from across the river, and faint upon the air they heard the drums of the enemy, slow and steady as the beating of a heart. By nightfall, they reached the ruins of Osgiliath. Once the proud capital of the realm, it now lay broken and half-sunken, its marble domes cracked and its bridges scarred by centuries of war. The river lapped softly against the stones, whispering through the empty halls. Calanmere took position upon the eastern bank. "Here we stand," he said, "as long as breath remains." The night deepened, and silence fell. Then the horns of Morgul sounded, long and low, and the darkness beyond the river came alive. Torches flared upon the opposite shore, countless as the stars. The enemy advanced in ordered ranks, orc legions clad in black, men of the east bearing scimitars that glimmered like fire, and behind them, towering shapes that moved with dreadful grace. Calanmere's heart tightened, for among them he saw the Witch King, tall upon his steed, his crown burning with pale flame. The air grew heavy, and the courage of men wavered. "Hold fast," Calanmere cried. "Remember Ithil. Remember the moon that was." His words steadied them, and when the first boats of the enemy drew near, a rain of arrows met them. The river ran black with blood. Twice the enemy charged, and twice they were driven back. But the Witch King's will was relentless. He spoke a word of power, and a wind rose from the east, breaking the fires upon the riverbank. One of the bridges cracked beneath sorcery, and a roar of triumph rose from the enemy. The men of Gondor fell back, step by step, to the second crossing. As dawn broke, Calanmere stood upon the last bridge, his cloak torn, his sword red with blood. "We will not yield," he shouted. The Witch King raised his blade, and the sky darkened. Yet in that moment, from far in the west, a trumpet sounded, clear, golden, and pure. The first light of morning struck the white tower of the city, gleaming upon its high windows. Hope kindled in men's hearts. Calanmere lifted his sword once more. "For Gondor!" he cried. The river boiled with battle, and the fate of the bridges hung by a thread. Above them all, the shadow of Morgul and the light of Minas Tirith contended, and the world seemed poised between despair and dawn. The sun rose pale and cold over Osgiliath, its light glimmering faintly through the smoke that veiled the river. The city of the stars had become a graveyard. Columns of broken marble jutted from the water, like the bones of a long-dead giant, and the cries of battle echoed across the ruins. Yet still, the men of Gondor fought. Calanmere stood upon the bridge, his armor battered, his cloak scorched. The air was thick with the reek of blood and fire. Around him, his rangers loosed their final arrows, and the clash of steel rang from every archway. From across the river, the Witch King's voice rose again, commanding his armies forward. "Break them," it said. "Drive the sons of Númenor into the sea." The host of Morgul surged anew, wave upon wave, their black banners streaming. Calanmere raised his sword. "Stand fast!" he cried. "For the White City, for the Tower of the Moon!" The rangers rallied to him. They fought upon the bridge like men possessed, their blades flashing in the dim light. Orcs fell by the score, tumbling into the water, yet still more came. The stone beneath their feet ran slick with blood. Then, from the heart of the enemy's ranks, the Witch King rode forth. His mount was vast and black, its hooves striking sparks upon the stone. In his hand, he bore a sword that burned with pale fire. "Fool," he said, his voice a whisper that filled the world. "Your tower is dust, your king soon ash. You cannot stand against me." Calanmere met his gaze, though his knees trembled. "We stand while Gondor stands," he said. "And even should we fall, our hearts shall not bow to the darkness." The Witch King laughed, a sound like the shattering of ice. He raised his blade, and the air grew heavy. Lightning flashed without storm, and the bridge quaked beneath them. But before he could strike, a horn sounded from the western bank, a deep, clear note that cut through the din of battle. The men of Minas Tirith had come. Across the water, the banners of the White Tree were rising. Reinforcements swept across the second bridge, their shields gleaming, their cries echoing through the mist. The armies of Morgul faltered, and Calanmere seized the moment. "Now!" he shouted. "Drive them back!" With renewed strength, the men of Gondor surged forward. The Witch King's forces wavered, then broke. The bridge shook as burning boats crashed against its supports, and the waters below frothed black with the slain. The Witch King turned his steed, his cloak billowing like a storm. "This is not your victory," he hissed. "It is a reprieve. The day shall come when even your white tower burns." Then he wheeled away, vanishing into the smoke. As the last of the enemy withdrew, Calanmere sank to one knee, his strength spent. Around him, the wounded groaned, and the dying called for aid. The river carried the wreckage of war downstream, mingling red with silver. When at last silence fell, he stood and looked upon the ruin. The bridges still held, but barely. Their stones were cracked, their railings shattered. Osgiliath had endured another day, but only just. Denethor himself came forth from the city, riding beneath the standard of the steward. His armor was unmarked, but his eyes were dark and weary. He surveyed the carnage and said only, "The price of holding ground grows higher each day." Calanmere bowed low. "We have done what we could, my lord. The Witch King is driven back, for now." "For now," Denethor repeated, his voice low. "He will return, and next time he will not come alone." He looked eastward, toward the mountains. The faint green glow of Minas Morgul still pulsed upon the horizon, steady as a heartbeat. "That light is a wound upon the world," Denethor murmured. "So long as it burns, there can be no peace." The steward turned back to Calanmere. "You will remain here with your men. Hold the crossings until further command. I return to the city." "As you command, my lord." Denethor's gaze lingered on him. "Do not mistake endurance for victory. The enemy has patience, and his gaze is upon us always. If we are to prevail, we must see as he sees." Calanmere stiffened, for he knew what that meant. "My lord, do not trust the stone." But Denethor's expression hardened. "Enough. I will not be counseled by fear." He turned and strode away, his cloak sweeping the ground like a shadow. That night, Calanmere walked among the ruins. The fires of the battlefield had died, and the stars shone faintly through the haze. The moon hung low, pale and distant, its reflection broken upon the river. He knelt by the water's edge, washing the blood from his hands. The current carried it away, yet he felt no peace. The image of Denethor's face lingered in his mind. The pride, the resolve, and beneath it, the slow creeping of despair. From the east came the faintest tremor, like the echo of drums. He knew what it meant. Morgul was stirring once more. He rose and returned to camp. His men lay sleeping, their armor stacked beside them, their faces drawn with weariness. He watched them for a long time, then whispered, "Rest while you may, my brothers. The storm is not yet spent." Days passed. The rains came again, turning the ruins to mire. Scouts brought word of new armies gathering beyond the mountains. The Witch King was forging a weapon of dread, they said, a host unlike any Gondor had faced. Each night, the light of Morgul burned brighter. It was said that when the clouds parted, one could see shapes moving upon its walls, figures pale as bone, dancing in silent mockery of life. One evening, as Calanmere stood watch upon the bridge, Mardil came to him. "Captain," he said softly, "what if the steward is right? What if only by the stone can we know the enemy's mind? Calanmere shook his head. The stone does not give knowledge, it gives deceit. The eye shows what it wishes to show. Once you gaze into its depths, you are never free again. Mardil sighed. And yet, what hope remains? We fight and bleed, and still the shadow grows. Calanmere looked eastward. Hope is not a thing of reason. It is a flame that burns because it must. So long as one heart keeps it, the darkness cannot wholly triumph. Mardil said no more. When dawn came, the mist upon the river turned crimson. Far to the east, thunder rolled, not of storm, but of war drums. The Witch King's host had begun its march anew. Calanmere tightened his grip upon his sword and whispered to the wind, "So it begins again." The banners of Gondor lifted in the rising breeze, white against the growing gloom. The river flowed on, silent witness to the endless struggle between light and shadow, and the men who stood upon its banks knew that the fate of the city, and of all the West, would soon be decided beneath the walls of Minas Tirith. The winter that followed was long and cruel, and it seemed that the very breath of Mordor swept across the lands of Gondor. Frost rimed the banks of the Anduin, and the trees of Ithilien stood bare and lifeless. No bird sang there now, and no deer wandered the glades. Only the whisper of cold wind passed between the ruined stones of Osgiliath, carrying with it the scent of decay. Calanmare's company endured as best they could, though their strength waned. They held the bridges as the steward commanded, guarding the crossings day and night. Yet every dawn they saw new fires kindled across the eastern plain, and every dusk they heard drums echoing from the Vale of Morgul. The Witch King was gathering his might. At times, Calanmere thought he could almost feel that dark will pressing against his mind, a silent malice that seemed to watch from afar. He slept little, for his dreams were troubled by visions of the Tower of the Moon burning with green fire, and the Palantír glowing like a red heart within its depths. One night, as he kept watch upon the broken walls, Mardil came beside him. "Captain," he said softly, "there is talk among the men. Some say the steward no longer comes forth from his hall, that he speaks with none but his sons." Calanmere nodded grimly. "So the whispers reach even here. I have heard the same. Denethor has looked too long into the stone. It will consume him if he does not turn away." Mardil sighed. "Then all of Gondor stands upon the edge of ruin. What hope remains when both the kingless realm and its keeper fall to despair?" Calanmere turned his gaze eastward, where the first faint glimmer of Morgul's light trembled through the fog. Hope remains where hearts refuse surrender. As long as men stand here, between the river and the darkness, hope endures. The younger man said no more, but his eyes shone faintly, and he set his hand upon his sword. That night passed into silence, broken only by the distant calling of crows. But before dawn, the horns of Gondor rang out across the plain. Scouts came racing from the south, their horses lathered with foam. "The enemy is on the move," they cried. "A host marches from the Vale. The Witch King leads them." Calanmere gave the order at once. "To arms! Light the signal fires!" The men of Gondor moved swiftly, though fear hung heavy upon them. Torches flared, blades gleamed, and archers took their places upon the crumbling battlements. From the east, the sound of drums grew louder. Then, through the morning mist, they saw the dark tide of Mordor's host. The earth trembled beneath its advance. Orcs in black mail, men from Harad with scarlet banners, and great beasts bearing engines of war filled the plain. At their head rode the Witch King, tall and terrible, his crown of steel wreathed in flame. He raised his sword, and his voice rolled over the river like thunder. "Behold the doom of Númenor! The walls of Osgiliath shall fall, and the White City shall burn." Calanmir's men wavered, but he stood firm upon the bridge, his cloak billowing in the bitter wind. "You shall not pass," he cried. "This is the land of the West, and no shadow shall claim it while we yet live." The Witch King laughed, and his laughter chilled every heart. "Then die as you must," he said. The battle began. Arrows darkened the sky. Stones from catapults crashed upon the walls. The enemy poured forward, their torches gleaming like fireflies in the gloom. The first wave struck the bridge with a roar, and Gondor met them with sword and spear. For hours they fought, until the river itself seemed to run red. The air was thick with smoke, and the cries of the wounded rose above the clash of steel. 3 times the enemy stormed the bridge, and 3 times they were thrown back. At last, as the day waned, a sudden shadow passed over the sun. The light dimmed, and the hearts of men failed. From the east, a black wind rose, and with it came a shriek so terrible that many dropped their weapons in terror. The Witch King had taken to the air upon his winged steed, a vast creature with leathery wings that blotted the sky. Its cry echoed like a dirge. It swooped low over the river, scattering the archers, and its shadow fell upon Calanmir himself. He lifted his shield, but the beast's wind knocked him to one knee. The Witch King's voice rang out above him. "Your courage avails you nothing. The age of men is ending." Calanmir forced himself to rise. "You have said those words before," he answered, "and still we stand." The creature screamed again, circling overhead. Its rider stretched forth a gauntleted hand, and dark fire leapt from his blade. The bridge shuddered as the stones cracked beneath the heat. "Fall back!" Mardil shouted. "The span will not hold!" But Calanmir didn't move. He lifted his sword, now blackened and nicked, and with a cry of defiance, hurled his spear upward. It struck the beast's wing, and the monster shrieked, veering aside. For a heartbeat, the Witch King reeled. Seizing the moment, Calanmir called to his men, "Now to the river! Break the bridge!" They hesitated, aghast. "Captain, do it. Better ruin than capture. We hold no ground worth more than Gondor's soul." Understanding dawned. With hammers and axes, they struck the bridge's supports. The stones groaned, cracked, and began to fall. As the Witch King turned back in fury, the center span gave way, plunging into the river below with a roar of breaking stone. The flood swept away the wreckage, carrying with it scores of orcs and men. The Witch King's steed wheeled upward with a scream, vanishing into the smoke. Silence fell. Calanmir stood upon the shattered edge of the bridge, breathing hard, his hair plastered with soot. Behind him, the survivors of his company gathered, bloodied and weary. Mardil came to him. "The crossings are lost," he said quietly. Calanmir nodded. "Aye, but the enemy has not crossed either." He looked westward, where the towers of Minas Tirith gleamed faintly in the distance. "We have bought the city a little time. Let it not be wasted." When night fell, they withdrew across the river. The fires of Morgul burned brighter than ever, staining the clouds green. And from that light, faint and terrible, Calanmir thought he saw the flicker of an eye watching them still. He turned away, weary but unbroken. "We live another day," he murmured, "and so long as we live, Gondor endures." Behind him, the ruins of Osgiliath smouldered, and the Witch King's wrath gathered like storm clouds. The Great War was coming, and the fate of all the West would soon be decided upon the fields before the White City. The snows melted early that year, though the wind still carried the breath of winter down from the White Mountains. It was said among the soldiers that even the seasons had grown uneasy, for the land itself knew what drew near. The dark armies were stirring, and all the world seemed to hold its breath. In Minas Tirith, the city of the kings stood watch beneath the shadow of Mindolluin, her white walls gleaming faintly in the pale sun. Yet the beauty of the city had grown somber. The streets were hushed, the fountains ran quietly, and the laughter of children was seldom heard. Every heart was heavy, for messengers came daily from the east bearing tidings of fire and war. Calanmere rode through the great gates with his company, weary and blood-stained from the ruin of Osgiliath. The guards saluted as he passed, their faces grim. The bridge had been lost, but the enemy had been stayed for a time, and that small victory was all Gondor had to cling to. When he came before the steward, Denethor sat upon his black chair in the high hall, clad in armor dark as iron. His hands rested upon the arms of his seat, yet he looked not at Calanmere, but past him, toward the eastern window. The firelight gleamed upon his stern face, and in his eyes burned a strange and restless flame. "You have done well," said Denethor at last, his voice low. "The enemy was delayed, though not defeated. Every hour you have bought us will cost him blood. For that, Gondor is in your debt." Calanmere bowed. "The bridges are gone, my lord, but the men stand ready. The Witch King's armies gather beyond the river. When he comes, he will bring the full might of Mordor with him." Denethor's gaze hardened. So it was foretold. The eye has turned westward at last. Gondor shall stand alone, as she always has. "My lord," Calanmere said carefully, "Rohan yet lives, and their riders have sworn friendship to Gondor. If the beacons are lit, they will come." Denethor's expression darkened. "Hope is a costly thing, Captain. Do not spend it too freely. Rohan will not come. The days of the old alliances are ended." Calanmere hesitated, hearing in the steward's tone a bitterness that chilled him more than the winter wind. "As you command," he said quietly. When the council was dismissed, he lingered in the great hall, gazing at the high dome painted with the stars of Elendil. How far they seemed now, dimmed by smoke and shadow. He thought again of the Palantír, hidden somewhere within the steward's chamber, and he feared that Denethor had already seen too much through its depths. That night he walked the walls of the city, watching the beacons upon the hills. One by one they flickered in the distance, silent towers of stone crowned with watchfires that slept unlit. He thought of the promise those flames held, and how easily they could be kindled if only hope endured. Below, the fields of Pelennor stretched out like a sea of grass, grey in the starlight. Somewhere beyond the river, unseen yet certain, the Witch King gathered his strength. Calanmere could almost feel the weight of that malice pressing against the walls, patient and inevitable. In the days that followed, preparations filled the city. Men labored in the forges, mending armor and sharpening swords. Archers practiced in the courtyards. Healers stocked their halls with herbs. The women of Minas Tirith moved quietly through the streets, gathering food and bandages for the coming siege. Calanmere and his rangers were stationed upon the outer wall of the first circle, overlooking the Pelennor. Each dawn they watched for smoke from the east, and each dusk they counted the days they had left. One evening, as he stood watch upon the ramparts, a voice spoke behind him. "You still hope, then?" Calanmere turned and saw Faramir, the steward's younger son, clad in green and silver. His face bore the same proud line as his father's, yet his eyes were gentler, filled with thought rather than pride. "Hope," Calanmere said, "is a thing one must hold, even when reason forbids it. Else why fight at all?" Faramir smiled faintly. spoken like a true ranger of Ithilien. My heart is with you in that, though my father's is not. He has looked too long into the darkness. It has shown him many truths, but not all. Calanmere inclined his head. The stone deceives. Aye, said Faramir, his voice soft, and the eye behind it hungers for all hearts that dare its gaze. They stood in silence, the wind tugging at their cloaks. At length, Faramir said, "When the hour comes, we shall ride together. My father will command that I lead the defense of Osgiliath anew. Will you come with me, one last time?" Calanmere's hand tightened upon the hilt of his sword. "You know I will. Ithilien is our home, and if we must fall, let it be upon its soil." So it was that when the dawn came red upon the mountains, the host of Gondor rode forth once more. The banners of the white tree streamed above them, bright against the darkening sky. Faramir led them, tall and unflinching, and beside him rode Calanmere and the last of his rangers. Across the Anduin they went, and there they beheld the plain before Osgiliath crawling with enemies. Black legions stretching as far as the eye could see. Towers of iron moved among them, and from the east came the sound of drums and the howling of fell beasts. Yet Faramir's voice did not falter. "For the White City," he cried. "For Gondor!" They charged, and the river echoed with the clash of steel. The first assault was terrible. Arrows rained upon them like storm. Many fell, yet they fought on, driving the foremost ranks of orcs into the water. Calanmere fought at Faramir's side, his blade flashing, his heart aflame. 3 times they broke through the enemy's lines, and 3 times they were driven back. The Witch King's power pressed upon them like a weight of iron, and the courage of men began to fail. At last, when all seemed lost, the horns of Rohan sounded faintly from the west. It was a distant cry, yet it stirred every soul that heard it. Calanmere felt strength return to his limbs, and Faramir's eyes lit with sudden hope. But the Witch King laughed, his voice carrying across the field like the toll of a bell. "Too late," he said. "The west is mine." Darkness rolled in from the east, blotting the sun. A great wind rose, scattering the banners of Gondor. Faramir was struck by a black dart and fell from his horse. Calanmere caught him, bearing him away even as the line broke, and the army began its retreat. Through the ruin of Osgiliath they fled, pursued by the cries of the enemy. Fire leapt from the towers, and the bridges blazed once more. Calanmere's arms ached, but he did not falter. He bore Faramir across the river and up the long road to the White City, even as the drums of Mordor thundered behind him. When they reached the gates of Minas Tirith, the healers took Faramir from his grasp. Calanmere sank to his knees, exhausted. Above the city, the first shadow of Mordor's storm clouds spread across the sky, dimming the light of day. The Witch King had crossed the river at last. The siege of Gondor had begun. The wind from Mordor swept over the plain of Pelennor, hot and foul, carrying with it the dust of ruin and the stench of death. It beat upon the walls of Minas Tirith like the breath of some monstrous beast, and the hearts of men quailed beneath it. The great white city stood ringed with shadow. The light of day itself seemed dimmed beneath the cloud that rolled out of the east. Within those walls the people waited, and all who could bear arms were called to the defense. The forges blazed day and night, and the sound of hammers echoed through the lower circles. Archers manned the battlements, their faces pale, their eyes fixed upon the dark plain below, where the armies of Mordor spread like an endless sea. Calanmere stood upon the wall beside the gate, his armor scorched and mended, his sword newly whetted. He had scarcely slept since the retreat from Osgiliath, yet his mind was clear and cold. The city was his last fortress now. Behind these walls lay all that remained of Gondor's pride, and he knew well that if they fell, the realm of men would fall with them. In the houses of healing, Faramir lay stricken with fever. The black dart's poison ran deep, and though the healers tended him with every art they possessed, his spirit wandered far. Denethor kept watch by his side, and none dared speak to him, for he was as a man carved of stone, his eyes hollow and his lips set in silence. Only once did he speak, and his words were bitter. "The last son of my house is dying," he said, "and soon the city will follow. What hope remains now?" No one answered. That night, the first assault began. The enemy came on like a tide unleashed, trolls with hammers, orcs bearing ladders and rams, and upon the heights of the Efelduth, catapults flung stones blazing with fire. They crashed upon the walls, shattering towers and gates. Arrows rained from the sky like black rain. Calanmere led his company where the fighting was fiercest. The enemy pressed upon the lower wall in swarming numbers, and the air grew thick with ash. Twice the gates of the first circle were nearly broken, and twice they were saved only by desperate valor. The rangers fought like men possessed, blades flashing red in the firelight. When dawn came, it brought no comfort, for the sky was veiled in storm cloud. The shadow of Mordor blotted out the sun. In that red-grey twilight, the hosts of Morgul gathered anew before the great gate of the city. And then came the Witch King. He rode forth upon his fell beast, black wings beating the air. The men upon the walls faltered, for his presence was dread incarnate. His crown gleamed with pale flame, and his voice carried far above the roar of war. "Men of Gondor," he cried, "behold your doom. Long have you defied the Lord of the Rings, and long have you delayed your fate. But the end has come at last. The Tower of the Moon has fallen. Now the Tower of the Sun shall perish likewise. Who among you can stand against me?" Silence answered him. Then, from the gate, Calanmare's voice rang out, steady as steel. "I can!" he cried. "And though my life be as a spark before your storm, still will I burn against you." The Witch King laughed, and the sound chilled the blood. He raised his hand, and the great ram, Grond, was brought forth, a monstrous thing of iron and black wood, shaped like the head of a wolf. At each blow it struck, the very ground trembled. Boom, boom, boom. The gates shuddered but held. Boom. Boom! Boom! The iron hinges screamed. The gate of Gondor splintered. The Witch King spurred his beast forward. "The city is mine," he said. "Let all who resist perish." Then from the sky came a trumpet blast, clear and golden. It rang across the plain, and every heart within the city lifted at the sound. From the north, upon the field of Pelennor, a host had come, riders clad in green and white, their spears gleaming in the sun that broke suddenly through the clouds. "The Rohirrim!" someone cried. "The Rohirrim have come!" The tide of war turned. From the walls, the men of Gondor shouted and beat their swords upon their shields. Calanmere felt tears sting his eyes as he watched the riders sweep down upon the enemy like a storm of silver. Yet still the Witch King remained before the gate. He turned his burning gaze upon Calanmere and lifted his sword once more. "You cannot escape your fate," he said. "The eye sees you." But Calanmere only smiled grimly. "Then let it see me stand." He drew his bow and loosed one final arrow, and though it could not pierce the Nazgul's armor, it struck the wing of his beast. The creature screamed, wheeling away into the air. In that moment of distraction, the gates burst open, not from within, but from without, for the riders of Rohan had broken through the ranks of Mordor and reached the walls. the fields of Pelennor were a storm of battle. Men and orcs, trolls and horses, all mingled in chaos. The air rang with the clash of swords and the cries of the dying. Calanmere fought his way through the gate and down onto the field, where he met again the soldiers of Morgul. He slew without count, his sword red to the hilt. The Witch King's voice thundered over the battle, a command of terror that drove even the boldest to their knees. Yet even he, the dread lord of Morgul, met his fate that day upon the fields of Pelennor, when he stood before the shield maiden of Rohan, and fell beneath the prophecy no man could escape. When the shadow lifted and the morning light returned, Calanmere stood amid the ruin, his breath ragged, his armor dented and torn. Around him lay the fallen, men and beasts alike, and the plain was strewn with smoke and ash. He looked toward the east, where the glow of Minas Morgul had burned for so many years. Now it was dim, its fires quenched, its sorcery broken by the fall of its master. A soft wind rose from the river, carrying away the taint of that unholy light. Mardil came to his side, his face streaked with soot. "It is over, for now," he said. Calanmere nodded slowly. "For now. But the true war lies beyond these fields. The eye is not yet blind, and the darkness does not sleep." They stood together, watching as the sun climbed higher. Upon the horizon, the towers of Minas Tirith shone white and fair once more, their banners fluttering in the clean wind. The people of Gondor would rebuild, and the memory of the Moon Tower's fall would pass into song. Calanmere turned away, his heart heavy but resolute. "We have held the line," he said. "The light endures." And so it was that the tale of Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, found its ending. The Palantír of Ithil was lost forever to the dark, yet from the ruin of its fall rose the strength of Gondor renewed. For though the stone had fallen into shadow, the spirit of those who had guarded it, men like Arthalion and Calanmere, burned ever bright. Thus ended the long vigil of the moon, and thus began the dawn of the final age of war. The eye still watched from the black lands beyond the mountains, but Gondor stood, proud and unbroken, and in the hearts of her people, the memory of Minas Ithil lived on, a promise that even in darkness, the light of the West would not die.